So to start this video, I thought I'd start by talking about vigilantes. Now I know what a number of you are thinking. Batman and any CW TV show currently on air. I'm going to exclude Supergirl though. I've only seen one episode that was worth my time, the rest were absolute trash. Crossovers weren't so bad though. Now I mentioned vigilantes because we all have in our minds an image of a vigilante, and I'm sure for everyone, the first vigilante you think of is Batman. A quote billionaire playboy that spends his money on fighting crime at night. Right. I mention all of this because obviously in our mind we have an idea of what a vigilante is. In fact, we have seen some in our, well, real world, as opposed to those from the comics, or translated into movies, the majority of which are absolute shit. Shots fired at DC In the real world, those vigilantes that come forward in the United Kingdom, well, they get put in a bit of a bind. You see, if you help someone, but by doing so harm another person, you then become a criminal, which is against the law. Also, the fact is, we like to tear our heroes down. We build people up. They can accomplish something truly great, and then we would just find a way to stick them in prison. Treat them like the perpetrator, because we're like that. I guess we could be considered the ultimate nihilist. Take, for example, in the Marvel movie Avengers, when the Hulk punched the Chitauri beast floaty thing, right? If that happened in London, the Hulk would be in, well, Wandsworth, Pentonville. Okay, I don't actually know any of the prison names in the United Kingdom, and I could have just made them up. Because, you know, I'm a law-abiding citizen, and most of my crimes are perceived. The point is, we in the United Kingdom, even though I personally don't take so much issue as long as the line isn't crossed, which we are going to get to in depth in a moment, and there's a reason for it. We as a country, for some reason, don't like it when people take law into their hands. If we had guns in our country, and a gunman shot someone, and somebody else shot the gunman, take a wild guess who we would arrest first. And if your answer isn't the person who shot the original shooter, you would be wrong, because we don't like that. Which I think is interesting. There is a rise of vigilantes, typically occupying social media, Facebook being a prime example. There is a Facebook group for the town I live in. Normally it's for things like missing dogs, or groups of gangs, or recently in my town, cars are being keyed. I think over 100 cars so far have been keyed. There is obviously a pattern here, so naturally one must ask, what are the police doing? The answer is, nothing. They won't do anything. Now it's not because of cuts. It's because they don't know how to do anything, because the only people that live here are old, so they probably believe the perpetrator is on a mobility scooter, which moves at a considerably faster rate to that of a policeman waddling down the street. Now these Facebook groups are an interesting source, and you'd certainly believe the police should use them, if at all possible, to aid them in gathering evidence, of course, eyewitness accounts, and use it as, if anything, a benchmark for what activities are taking place in their town. We know for a fact the police are being pushed more digital to tackle other types of crimes that are perceived to have been done on the internet. But I would argue they should also use these kind of Facebook groups, Twitter groups of course, and probably the odd Discord server, if they want to. I'm not sure they can handle the memes though. These are from Magnus. He has a lot of Transformers. Me gusta. Certainly in aiding in investigations. Now I mention all of this and have waffled on without actually getting to the core point about vigilantes. There is a line, of course there is. I personally don't take issue with a vigilante existing, provided they don't break the actual law. If they performed a citizen's arrest on someone and didn't harm them in the process, and possibly gathered enough evidence, I would like to see how that could go in a courtroom. I would very much like to see this go to a courtroom, to see if the evidence could be considered valid. Obviously it would not, which is a shame. Private investigators, I do think we have some in this country, but I believe they have to work in conjunction with the police and get a license for it. When an aforementioned vigilante starts to use aggressive negotiations with a perceived perpetrator of a crime, then we have a problem, because at that point it's just two people fighting, with one accusing the other of being a criminal while pummeling that same criminal's head in with a stone, or a baton, a nunchuck, a batarang. You get the point. Once you cross that line, you are no longer a vigilante, you are a criminal. So how one goes about being incorruptible, uncorruptible, incorruptible, without falling prey to becoming the very monster you intend to fight is a very fine line. Understandably, especially in this country, vigilantes don't last long. They don't last long because, well, if our police are willing to get themselves prosecuted for shoving someone, which I'm sure has happened by now, and people outside the police force have been arrested for carrying a potato peeler as a deadly weapon, you can only surmise a vigilante's only weapon is their fart gas. And I don't know many vigilantes that want to waddle down the street wearing thunder pants. So now that I've gotten that all out of the way, I want to talk about a town called Hartlepool. Hartlepool makes up one of the areas more commonly known as Teesside, which is basically in the northeast of England and centres around the urban centre of Middlesbrough. It gets its name, by the way, because the settlements around it are near the River Tees, so it's just Now I mention Hartlepool because it has one of the worst crime rates in the area. In fact, of the 10 districts in Teesside, Hartlepool has, according to the crime statistics for Teesside itself, the highest crime rate of all the districts in that northeast area, where in March 2017 alone, there were 4,167 crimes committed there alone, nearest being Central, which was Middlesbrough, with 3,500. The majority of the crimes were antisocial behaviour, so we can just put that down to gobby little teenagers being gobby little northeastern uneducated yuppie teenagers. But other crimes that were quite prominent included criminal damage, arson, burglary, shoplifting, vehicle crime, that's not surprising, but the second highest was violence and sexual offences, which is quite shocking. Although I would point out, Middlesbrough had a higher violence and sexual offence number of crimes committed at 645. But let's face it, anything over 0 is unacceptable. The police in this area have actually given up on tackling crime, and a lot of it has been attributed to police cuts after 8 years of this, and since the government has said austerity is coming to an end, you would expect more money to start being invested into this. However, but over the last few years the budget has been cut by over 40 million, to the point where there are not enough people, or police officers in general, to tackle crime on the streets when it happens, and they're actually short when they send 2 from Hartlepool to transfer 1 person to Middlesbrough. That's how bad it is. Now you could blame all of this on austerity. You really could, and that's fine. But again, people seem to forget why austerity had to be introduced. And look what's happened because of it. Look what's had to happen to keep services running at a base minimum, which has allowed crime to spike. People need to start taking responsibility for their failed pet projects, excessive spending, and not balancing the books. It was reckless to do it, and now crime is on a rise. There are crime rates now for Hartlepool, and you can actually go to the police.uk map and pull up individual maps for numbers of crimes reported. The most recent for Hartlepool puts crime at 1,439, which is a ridiculous amount for that area. I earlier mentioned vigilantes, and the reason I mentioned them is because the Hartlepool public have been told not to take the law into their own hands after a neighbourhood patrol was formed. This was only formed because 500 officers and £40 million was cut from the budget since 2010. That is a huge number of police officers, which is exacerbated by the earlier mentioned transferring. If the police have to make more savings to the point where they have to close their custody suites, so all the cells no longer become active. If crime is going up and there is no one there to tackle it, what are you going to do? Call in one of those private security services or rally the military, neither of which will yield results realistically. I have many times said that it isn't police numbers that acts as a suitable deterrent, but Hartlepool completely shits on that point. It is quite clear to me, when you've lost over 500 police officers and crime has spiked to the point where you may as well not even have a constabulary if you're even closing down or considering closing down the custody, I can't believe I'm saying this, suite, to make savings. If austerity is coming to an end, one would hope to tackle crime, especially considering what the crimes are. You would seek to invest more money in the local council, who could then allocate the right funds to the police, if it is in fact a devolved administration issue. Now, the residents who have been coming out as a neighbourhood patrol have said it is purely a deterrent. We want the people who are going around our area nicking things, stealing, to know there are people walking the streets actively looking for them. And this comes after many MPs have warned that public trust in policing was breaking down, as Hartlepool was not the only constabulary that was struggling to cope with crime because of austerity. Local councillor Kevin Craney, or Cranny, with two N's, said central government cuts were forcing police to prioritise what they see as their priorities with less people. People have voiced concerns that they report a crime and nothing seems to happen. It's a couple of days before they get any sort of feedback. People are experiencing a lot more minor crimes, whether it's stealing from cars or gardens. At my house, they stole the lead off the roof the other month. I don't suppose you have any jippers in your area, do you? I know that's a bit of profiling on my part, but I grew up surrounded by them. Lead vanished in a heartbeat. Understandably, with all of this, local people are feeling quite vulnerable. Their properties being damaged or stolen. There are youths running around with nothing to do. So in their head, the only thing they can do, because they can't be bothered to do anything for themselves, like education, or apprenticeships, or NVQs, they decide instead they'll just nick things because they won't get arrested, so they don't have to worry about a criminal record. If you want to do that, why don't you just put on a mask and roll with Antifa? Oh wait, you can't do that. Antifa are far too upper class for you. You are lowly oiks to them. It is quite a sad state of affairs that the police in Hartlepool have basically given up. The cuts have hit them so hard that they cannot do their job. Police numbers in their area being so bad, or low, that crime itself is the worst in Teesside. Not that it is in any way a competition. Teesside crime is not great in any case. Although, there is a huge difference between Hartlepool and Coolby Newham, where their crime rate is only 1,328 for the month of March 2017, as opposed to Hartlepool's 4,000. I do not believe that vigilante justice will solve this problem. It may have the effect of making people want to move to other areas to commit crime, but something actually has to exist that makes them stop. Whether it be the people as our community rising up, rallying behind the banner of justice. Have I cringed people out enough yet? To the point where the people themselves start to shout things like, "I know your mother," which would scare most people if we lived in the 80s still and parents could beat their children. Not that I condone that in the slightest. I have fallen prey to the wooden spoon. It is not something I would ever want repeated. Point is, we've gotten to a point where people now know there is no real deterrent to stop them from committing a crime, if there is nothing in place or a system in place that can realistically address the crime. Therefore, either an entirely new service needs to exist, or you need to rebuild what had to be stripped to the bare bone, because Batman can't fix this number. That's a lot of people for Batman to throw batarangs at. Anyway, I would love to know what you all think about dealing with crime rates and deterrence. I am very much interested in that. I have heard many MPs give many different answers to this, some going so far as to say, let's just bring back the death penalty as a deterrent for certain crimes. So please let me know in the comments below. So I hope you all have a lovely Sunday, and thank you all for listening. Okay, we're not entirely done. You see, I had thought upon finishing this, oh, that was it. No. You see, this has actually gone further and extends past Hartley, where there are areas around the rest of the United Kingdom where families, locals, scared locals, in areas like Essex and in certain neighbourhoods of London, who are paying for wardens to patrol the streets at night and for people to escort their children home from school. In certain areas of London, I get it, because of knife crime, and Essex is hardly an exception to violent crime. Places like Belgravia and Chigwell have nasty crime rates. So now we do know some areas are paying for private security. In poorer, lower income areas like Hartlepool itself, that's not the case. So I did want to put this out there, that there are areas doing something to tackle it because the police can't, or won't. Misogyny is more important than a knife, after all. Sarcasm sign if someone didn't get that. Seriously. Anyway, yes. Laters.